Welcome to the instruction video for the Warminster Library's Teen Take-Home Craft. This video is a guide for creating your own cross-stitch pattern. If you reserved a kit from the library, most of the supplies are provided for you. If you did not, you can still follow along with this video. You'll just need to acquire your own supplies first. The supplies needed for this craft are as follows: 1 embroidery hoop, 1 needle, 1 piece of cross-stitch fabric, grid paper, scissors, a pencil, and thread. If you picked up a kit from the library, you are provided with embroidery floss, which is recommended for most cross-stitch. The fabric provided in the kit, if you picked one up from the library, is 14 count, which means that in any square inch you can fit 14 stitches across and 14 stitches down. The grid paper provided is also 14 count. The first step is to decide on a design you want to create. You can search for free pre-made patterns online, but I encourage you to create your own if you're feeling creative. You can create your design from a reference image, which is a little easier, or freehand a pattern onto the grid paper, which might take some trial and error. There are also free online software that you can use to design cross-stitch patterns, and these are often helpful when tackling more complicated projects. Since you were only provided with black thread, if you're looking for a pattern online or using a reference image, find one that will just work with one color. Something with more white space is best for your first time, as it will require less time, less stitches, and less thread. For example, a short quote that you like might be the easiest option, or line art. In general, especially if this is your first time, you might want a design with not a lot of detail. You can see some examples on this slide. While all of the images are of a black and white cat, some are more complex than others. If you're working from a reference photo or image, print out the reference, then lightly trace it onto the graph paper by laying the grid paper over the image. Make sure that you are printing a design that will fit on the fabric that is provided in the kit, and if you would like to display your cross-stitch once it's completed in the hoop, then make sure that it will fit inside of that as well. You can trace the inside of the hoop onto your grid paper to make sure that your design will fit, which is what I did in the image on this slide. Once you have your design traced onto the paper, translate those lines into X marks so you can visualize what the cross stitches will look like. Some parts of the lines that you traced from your reference image may only be in a small section of a square, in which case you might not put an X mark and therefore a stitch in that space. Once you've got your design worked out, you can start preparing your needle and thread. First, you will want to carefully separate your embroidery floss. It is comprised of 6 strings, but for the purposes of me teaching you in this video, you'll just be stitching with 1. Some other designs, and as you get more complicated with cross stitch, you might use 2 or 3 strands, depending on the thickness that you want. First, cut roughly 1 arm length or about 3 feet of your thread. Any longer than that and it's more likely to get knotted as you work. When separating the strands, pull apart slowly and carefully from the center of the 3 feet of thread, and then only do 1 strand at a time. Once you've got 1 fully separated, you can then thread it through your needle. You might find it easier, depending on your design, to start from the centermost stitch and work your way outward from there. No matter where you start on your design, you will insert your needle from the bottom of the fabric, pushing it up through one of the small holes in the fabric. Pull the thread through until there is only about an inch left on the back side. Making sure that that remaining inch stays on the back side, insert your needle into the hole diagonally up and to the right of the hole that you just pulled the thread through. Push it down through all the way until it is tight. You should now have what looks like a forward slash. To make a complete stitch, you will then bring the needle back up through the fabric, this time in the hole directly under the one you just went through. Then complete the stitch by moving diagonally up and to the left, creating an X shape. So you'll see in the image on the bottom right You come up through hole number 1, go down through hole number 2, come up through hole number 3, and then go down through hole number 4. Technically, it does not matter whether you go up and to the left first or up and to the right first. As long as you remain consistent throughout all of your stitches, it will make your final result look a little neater. If you are working on an area that will require a lot of stitches, then it's best to make a row of half stitches, then go back and finish them. For example, start your first stitch pushing the needle through from the back, then into the hole up and to the right, then back up through the hole directly under that. But instead of going to the left and completing the stitch, make another forward slash to the right. Continue until you've made a row of as many stitches as there are in that row of your design. So it should look like a row of forward slashes. And then once you've reached the end, go backwards and complete each stitch one by one. Doing this in areas with lots of stitches saves you some thread, as you won't have to cross back over work that you've already done. So you can see on the image to the right, I have 2 different rows of stitches. The first was a row of just half stitches, and then I went back and completed them one by one. And the bottom is individual stitches. So you'll see I used less on the back side from doing just the half stitches and then working backwards. As you make your first few stitches, try to make sure they cross over the extra thread that you left on the back as you started. This will hold it in place, making sure that the whole thing does not unravel. If your design has multiple parts to it in different parts of the fabric, cut your thread after one section is done rather than traveling all over the back of the fabric, as the thread may end up being visible from the front and it's easier to get all tangled up. In addition, this will likely save you some thread in the end. You can see an example of what not to do in the image. So you'll see the long stretches of strands where I skipped parts and skipped across the fabric. If you make a mistake, you can undo it if you catch it early enough. You'll just have to pull out each stitch one by one slowly. In addition, you won't be able to make stitches right on top of each other because you'll end up finishing one stitch and trying to start from the same spot, which will basically pull the thread out and undo that stitch. So work in sections left to right, and if you move up a row, start your first stitch one over from the row below, or just start on the row underneath. When you run out of thread, tie a knot on the back, and if there are no nearby stitches to make, or with a new length of thread, stitch over the excess with a few stitches like you did at the beginning. When you have completed your design, it's time to decide how you're going to frame it. If you choose to leave it in the embroidery hoop, cut off the excess fabric, leaving about an inch or 2 hanging over the edges of the hoop that you can fold back so it doesn't pull through all the way. You could also display it in a picture frame if you wanted. We would love to see how your cross stitch turned out. You can share a picture on social media and tag the library. Congratulations on finishing this craft!